Something that really surprised me when I first started vending is how rarely price is the thing that decides a sale. Most of the time, people had already decided if they were going to buy from me before we ever talked numbers. What's up? I'm Taylor from Mountain Silver Trading Company. I started vending at the beginning of 2025, and I know how overwhelming this thing can feel when you're just getting started, especially when it comes to actually figuring out how to sell your cards instead of just display them. Today we're going to be talking about the psychology of selling at card shows, why people stop at certain tables, why people buy from one vendor over another, and how I think about layout, conversation, and building trust when I'm behind the table. So, to lead off, before anyone ever buys anything, they have to actually stop at your table. I've found that when someone stops at your table, it's for one of three reasons typically. The first reason is kind of the most straightforward. Your table seems really approachable and easy to understand. Having a nice clean layout, keeping your cards in a straight line, having clearly marked prices are all big reasons that people are willing to stop and give your table even another second of consideration. I know most of the people watching this have been there where they walk by a table and there's so much going on and it's kind of chaotic, they just kind of move on. The second reason, and something that I've been experimenting with lately, is having big showstopper pieces that start a conversation. I recently picked up an art set of Shadowless base set blister packs, and you would be amazed how many people stop just to point them out and ask about them. Having a couple of big showstopper pieces in your case, even if you don't intend on selling them, gets the conversation going and gets people to stop and look at what else you have. And then the third, and what I think is the most underrated of these three things, is you get greeted by the person behind the table. I make a conscious effort to greet every single person that approaches my table, not with anything pushy or salesy, but something small to break the ice. My go-to line is, "What kind of trouble are we trying to get into today?" This can help immediately disarm the people who are approaching your table, keep things really lighthearted, and most of the time we'll get a little bit more information around what kind of things people are looking for. Next, let's talk about why people actually buy your cards outside of price. But before we do, I want to thank today's sponsor, you. If you're new to vending and this stuff feels overwhelming, that's exactly why I'm making this series. If you find any of this information helpful today, subscribing to the channel is the easiest way to support and keep things going. All right, back to the psychology of selling. All right, you've pulled a couple of people in, you've started a conversation, but now as a new vendor, why are they going to buy from you versus the vendor next to you? There are a couple of things that you can do to help ensure you're closing the most deals possible early on in your vending career. The first and most important thing is building trust with your customers quickly. Being able to talk about the cards at your table outside of just how much they cost or how rare they are is really important. Talking about how cool the art is, the sets that they come from, understanding the appeal of the card outside of its monetary value can help build trust and authority with your customer quickly and gets them in a more comfortable headspace to make a purchase from you. The second thing to think about comes down to your selection as a new vendor. Early on, I think it's important to have selection at every price point. I love selling big grails more than anybody, but the majority of my sales at any show come from things like full art trainer cards, gold cards, low-end illustration rares, mid-range hits in that $20 to $50 range. You would be amazed the number of people that come up to your table that are working on master sets for whatever set they're looking at. And having a wide selection from those sets, not just the biggest hits, will help build relationships and get people coming back time and time again. Finally, as a vendor, I think it's very important to have flexibility in your pricing. On almost any sticker in my case, I'm not firm on my asking price. If people feel like they won on a transaction, they're much more likely to buy and then become repeat buyers in the future. Now, that doesn't mean throw all of your margin out the window and just offer discounts to anyone who approaches. We'll talk about the strategy of negotiating in a future video. I've found leaning in on phrases like, "We're really close, let's figure this out," or my personal favorite, "Throw me another 10 on top and we have a deal." You'll find that you're closing deals much more often if you're willing to work with people on pricing. A lot of the trust and confidence building that you do comes from the energy that you exude from behind your table. I very rarely will try and hard sell someone on a card when they're at my table. Most of the time, I'm going to be mirroring the energy of whatever the person is bringing to the conversation. You'll have a number of times where someone just wants to be quiet and browse and look at your stock. That's totally fine. I've actually found that these people tend to get annoyed if you continue to probe and ask questions and dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Ask a few questions. If they kind of shut it down, give them space, let them look, and then circle back around if they're still hovering after a couple of minutes. If someone's really talkative, excited about their set they're working on, and really wanting to chit chat, I've found mirroring that energy and bringing that same passion to the conversation really gets them engaged in the cards that they're looking for. Just keep in mind, keeping people comfortable at your table is the number one way you're going to get them to buy a card. The other thing that's really important when it comes to building trust and energy from behind the table is your body language. This part's pretty simple, but it matters. When I'm vending, I don't sit while I'm doing deals with customers or while people are looking at my table, which a lot of times means I'm standing for 10 to 12 hours at a time. It's hard, it's really rough on the knees after I get home, but I promise being able to stand, look someone eye to eye, and match their energy really changes how approachable you feel. One of the other things I really try to avoid, unless I absolutely have to, is being on my phone at the table. If I'm comping out a trade, snapping a picture for my inventory, or quickly posting something to my Instagram story, that's one thing, but just scrolling through TikTok, writing out novels to my wife in a text message, or heaven forbid, being on a phone call, kill the engagement I've found at my table. Listen, some vendors can make it work. I've found for myself that I can't, and so I make a conscious effort to remove that distraction and allow me to be really present with my customers while they're there. All right, we've talked about some of the psychology about being behind the table and how your presence can affect selling, but I do want to talk a little bit about visually selling your product. I'm very intentional with the way I lay out my cards during a show. I found typically people will scan display cases the same way they read a book. Start in the top left, finish at the bottom right. So usually I will put my biggest, most expensive pieces towards the back or top of my showcase, and the cheaper, less expensive cards near the bottom. Keeping my cards spaced very evenly in a straight line with very clearly marked pricing, like I mentioned earlier, is one way to keep my table very legible for people as they approach. The other thing I like to do is group sets or like cards together. So things like Prismatic Evolutions or Rayquaza Alt Arts, I will group on the same row, even if it breaks up the pricing rule a little bit. One other thing that I've been doing recently is for vintage cards or half art cards, I've been grouping them together by typing so that you get a really nice uniform coloring across an entire section. This also makes a really interesting rainbow look when people approach the table and they're looking specifically at my vintage cards. Having backstock not set out properly or penny sleeves thrown all over the place creates visual mess that's really off-putting to people. Keep things clean, simple, and straight, and you'll notice people seem to linger longer. As a quick summary, the most common mistakes that I see new and early on vendors make that absolutely kill their sales momentum is 1. Not having clearly priced product at your table. A lot of times, if people don't see a price, they'll just skip your table altogether. 2. Really sloppy setups. If your cards are crooked, uneven, or there's too much visual clutter in your table, people will just skip it outright. 3. Being too firm on pricing or thinking people can't find the cards that you have somewhere else. Being willing to work with someone on pricing to help close a deal is almost always better for you because you're able to get liquidity and have cash for the next card that comes to your table that someone's wanting to sell. And finally, my biggest early mistake is trying to cram way too many cards in my display case. Early on, I had a setup where cards were literally overlapping like this, and you could barely even see what the card looked like, just so that I could fit all of my inventory in my case. I promise you, slowing down, getting proper spacing, and maybe not even putting out all of your inventory is better than having it so that no one can see what your cards are. All of this sounds really simple, but it's much harder in your first show. You're nervous, you're afraid of running out of inventory, you hesitate taking big swings on big cards. But what most people don't realize when they're first starting is shows are some of the best places to get more inventory. That fear will fade over time, but only after you experience it. All of the psychology around selling that we talked about today, layouts, conversations, building trust, hit very differently when you're standing at your table for the first time. So in episode 6, I'm breaking down your day of survival guide for your very first show. We're talking load in, doors opening, slow periods, rushes, common mistakes, and what no one prepares you for. All that coming up next week.